Are we live? Yes, we are. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cloud Lounge. I am Enrico Signoretti, your host and moderator. And the Cloud Lounge is a live talk show. You can think about it as an open roundtable discussion. We are inspired by thought provoking articles and compelling news sourced from what we found interesting on the internet. Topics include the domains of cloud computing, artificial intelligence, data management, security, infrastructure, IT strategy, brilliant minds shaping the industry, or even anecdotes that we find through our interaction with various teams at Cubbit, with partners or customers. My role here is to initiate this conversation by providing essential context and initial commentary. Then we open the floor to the microphone for your comments and opinions. These live sessions are recorded and later shared as podcast so that you can enjoy the Cloud Lounge experience even when you are unable to join us in real time. The podcast is released a few days after the live show on Spotify. And without any further delay, let me introduce my guest and colleague, Blaine Harnack. He works in our data team and he is our head of user data management at Cubbit, among other things. Hi, Blaine. How are you today?
Hello, Enrico. Hello, everyone listening. I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. A little just snippet about me. I'm the head of technical services and user data management at Cubbit. I work alongside Enrico and many excellent colleagues. And among several things, I facilitate user data, of course, or the management of it, user documentation, production, technical support, as well as quality assurance. So compatibility and configuration testing of the applications that use our services. And so when I got this list of topics today, Enrico, I was very happy to read them and very happy to join you for a discussion as well. They're quite intriguing.
Fantastic. So let's start with with the news. So we usually have these two sections. The first one is about the news that we find interesting on the internet, and then we delve into something more specific or more, let's say, connected to the industry in general. So what I found interesting to uh, this week, and thanks Francesco for digging every day on the internet to find these beautiful articles, is an article that appeared on Tech Target not long ago, and it was, you can think about it as a let's say a clickbait, because it's the classic title: four things you need to know now about edge computing. But one of the, there are 4 points that are, very, anyway, they are insightful. I mean, they are interesting. There is something of value in them. What I think is really interesting is the third point in the article that says edge innovation requires a cohesive data strategy to scale. And with this, if we look at it, it's clear that every time you think about edge computing and you think about the value of edge is all around data. So you are collecting data, you are bringing computational power close to where it's really needed. And in most of the cases, you are doing this because you need to crunch some data that you are collecting from sensors, from cameras, from many other sources that you have there. Even, not only machine generated data, but sometimes also um, we are talking about human generated data. And what is really important for me is that it's this this connection between the edge, the cloud, and your core on-premises infrastructure is fundamental, because you have to. One of the most important parts about data is that you have to consolidate this data to make sense to build the overall picture, and you need to really understand your data, not just from what you're generating in a single location, but you need to collect, transform, and sometimes reuse this data to make it really useful. And Blaine, just to pull you in this, I mean, immediately, I know that you do a lot of this. I mean, so collecting a huge amount of data. Maybe we can start just with learning a little bit of what you do on a daily basis at Cubbit.
Sure, of course. The first thing I'd like to focus on, outside of what we do on a daily basis in the company, is to echo the words cohesive data strategy. This is something that actually continued to ring in my head while I was reading that article as well. So we actually didn't discuss this in advance, you and I, but it's funny that we both pulled this exact phrase out as something very important. Because before I mention anything about what we do, I think it's important also to mention something that's like I think best represented as like a roadblock, not just to us, or an obstacle rather, not just to us, but many companies. Because before you can create that value, which is what you want to do as the end result, of course, it's a difficult path to get to a point where you can leverage data effectively if there isn't a cohesive company-wide strategy to gather, to use, and to collaborate on the data usage. And this becomes exponentially more complicated when you're starting to gather data from multiple locations. So you don't just have a single centralized location where you take information, you aggregate it, you visualize it, and you share it with the company, but you have multiple different sources. And so this is something that I'm sorry, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to pick your brain a little, Enrico, because you have so many years of experience in the field. How does a company, especially a smaller company, begin to deal with that obstacle? Basically, this is at a business level to begin. So developing a cohesive data strategy that's collaborative
Yes,
within the company. I'm curious about your thoughts
I
on
think
that.
that yes, no, right. I mean, so in my previous experience as an analyst, I had this kind of conversations a lot of time. I mean, so most of the time, it's the struggle is real. I mean, especially at the beginning, the business side doesn't really understand what they can do with the data that
Mhm.
they have, how to reuse the data, and so there is a lot of internal, let's say, transfer of information that is needed at the beginning. Okay, so what we really have, how can we use it, what's the advantage of doing it, because connecting the dots is not easy for most of the organizations. Sometimes you are already collecting tons of data, and but really I mean you or better, you are not collecting the data, you are producing the data, and you are throwing it away because you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah,
And
I call
I
this
have this story
collecting data for
about
the collection's sake.
exactly. But you know that if you think about most of the machines that we produce in now, they already have logs, they already have microcontrols, they can produce a lot of information, and every time your support is involved, somebody opens a ticket, and you have to dig into investigate the problem and everything. One of the things that you do is you have a technician or an expert that goes into the logs to see what happened. Okay, and most of the time from this log you see, okay, this machine started to show some glitches, a few things maybe months ago, but nobody cared about it, and nobody knew about it because it was just a glitch. The machine was working anyway, and then all of a sudden the component broke and everything stopped, creating a major disruption. And so a couple of years ago, I had well, probably more than a couple of years ago now, but it was just before COVID, probably. I had this very interesting discussion with a company that was already producing all this data. They were not collecting anything, and they did have already at the time the ability to connect remotely to these machines to check the logs and everything. And
Mhm.
we started thinking, okay, why are not you collecting all of this? Why are you not building a sort of, let's call it data lake, maybe improperly, but why don't you collect all this information and you start to figure out if you can do something with it? I mean, at least you already have the logs in your location instead of connecting remotely. This is already brings, an immediate advantage because you already have everything without asking
Of
access or
course, of
whatever.
course.
And the second thing is, at that point, you can start building something. And so we started doing all this kind of reasoning, and they started from that, and now they have a very powerful system. And maybe this is the way to go. I mean, you have to start small. So again, Blaine, I mean, how did we start at Cubbit, for example? I mean, we have all these appliances all across the world, a lot of users, a lot of accesses to our system. How did we start doing something with our data?
It's a good question. Well, we were in a unique position because not many companies start with the foundation of a distributed technology. Sometimes they might branch out into another area. Maybe they're in logistics or manufacturing, and as they grow, they become more and more distributed by the nature of expansion. And so they have to get better over time at collecting and analyzing the value that the data can bring to their organization. And so we had a unique opportunity and, of course, a unique challenge that at the very beginning, we weren't just dealing with a centralized location where we pull application use logs, for example, but we had a distributed network of nodes, thousands, literally thousands of them, that were not just feeding us log data. For example, they're small computers, so we could easily pull logs from them, but they're also available with sensor data. So we were able to, in some cases, understand how things were working just in the deepest reaches of the network by looking at the sensor and log data. And so how we did that initially was very haphazardly. So individually looking at nodes one by one and troubleshooting issues that way. But eventually, once we were able to, of course, centralize and aggregate this information, we were able to create a very simple visualizations that brought great advantages to the
Mm.
organization. One example that I have just off the top of my head is as of most recently. Actually, we spoke about it in our last company update, and the brilliant
Mhm.
engineer who looked into it is actually here on the call with us. His name is Saverio. And what we did was we took a bunch of log data that we were getting from ourselves that were giving us specific error codes, and we were visualizing them in a scatter plot, so we could see clusters of information that were related to uptime of these nodes, downtime of these nodes, and we were seeing some interesting clustering of this information. So at first we had no idea what the logs were telling us. We knew, for example, there's some erratic behavior on these nodes. And so putting it in this simple visualization, we were able to immediately group out a section of nodes that once we dug into them individually, or rather Saverio did, we understood very quickly that they were malfunctioning on a hardware level, and we were able to quickly push that to the service and support team, who were able to immediately reach out to the customers. And within a few hours, I would say, of us figuring this out, we had already organized RMAs for these specific nodes to get working hardware in their hands. And so that's a great way of doing things on a curative level. But of course, we're always very interested in understanding how we can do this in a preventative way as well. And I know you have a lot of cool ideas about predictive analytics and understanding
Yeah.
how trends go over time and how you forecast problems before they even happen, which is ideal
So
but
one
difficult.
one thing that you said though, yeah, one thing that you said though is visualization. I mean, is visualization the first key to success? I mean, uh, it's cool. I mean, you are using Grafana, you are using all these tools that create these very fancy graphics. Is it really important? I mean, is it a way to translate data in something that a human brain, especially a business human brain, can understand better? So,
I
is it
think it's
something that we
valuable,
should
very,
always
very,
do?
very valuable. I think if you can do it, you should. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to say that the human brain can interpret photos better than it can, uh, numerical or text-based data. But to answer your question, I don't think it's necessary. Absolutely not. Like if we break it down to its most simple format, if we think of a big powerful analytics suite isn't necessary. So if we think about data as an example, like in a simple tabular format, it's likely that every company has some form of this already. And so let's completely forget
Mhm.
about visualizations. So if we look at each of these tables and we ask ourselves, like, why do we collect and reference this? Why do we want to see this table? Then we can start to understand the questions that it's supposed to answer, and we can implement, free tools to visualize it, or just to categorize it. It's very important to categorize or to aggregate data, because from there we can understand trends in an easier to digest format. Because of course, once we start to deal with uh, information from machines that are giving us millions of pieces of data per day, it's impossible without categorization. So this is why you need a good engineering team working with a good analytics team, because the analytics team can help steer the categorization in a way that can move the business forward as well. But yeah, I don't think visualization is necessary, but personally I think it's a good step, especially to communicate complicated phenomenon, especially business wide, as
Mhm.
easy as possible. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do. Touching back to the cohesive data strategy, it's I think it's very important to give that to make the data valuable for everyone company wide. And so if you can communicate a relatively complicated concept, for example, a bunch of hardware failures on some nodes in a cluster far away somewhere, in a very easy to understand and digest format, then it's worth the time to do it, especially within a company.
Mhm. And after that, I mean, the visualization, as you said, is not important, but actually it's helpful. And and then we mentioned predictive analytics, which is I mean, from my point of view, is a very powerful tool, because you can say, okay, we analyzed all the data that we have, and sometimes it's very easy. I mean, there are basic mathematical function that you learn probably during your high school, and you
Mhm.
can say, okay, just by applying these functions, I can easily show you the trends, what is happening with our data, and so give you, okay, in the last year we did this and this means that potentially in a range that is quite of course, if nothing disruptive happens, I can say in a few months from now you will see something that looks like it, okay, which is very powerful, because enables this enables you to plan in advance. And it could be capacity planning, for example, but you can plan on major, you can see, for example, how your company reacts to seasonality, or how your machines are working over time, or many other things. So you can plan to move spare parts close to the machines that are breaking,
Mhm.
or supposed to break, so that to improve the user experience, for example. And this is not difficult, right? I mean, or am I asking too much as a business person? If I can collect this data, is it achievable for a, let's say, mid to small size kind of company, not the large companies that can probably do all. They have budgets, they have people, they have everything.
Oh yeah, that there's a lot more when you have a lot more money, there's a lot more you can do. And so
Mhm.
but I think what you were saying at the beginning of the call, Enrico, was correct. Like sometimes all that you need is a few simple pieces of information. And from that you can extrapolate quite a lot of value, especially when you have it over time, when you can start to visualize trends. So moving back again to the example of like distributed compute nodes, for example, if you see some, just let's take one specific piece of sensor data like temperature. We know, for
Mhm.
example, that hard drives die in a hot environment over time. Heat is one of the things that kills them, and fairly quickly. And so if we notice a collection of specific nodes that are operating in an above average temperature or a less than ideal temperature for long periods of time, we can, I think, make a reasonable business argument that those are going to be ones that fail sooner than the rest. And so I think that if you were using the example of manufacturing, I think if you could probably even something as simple as hours of service for a machine, one that's done 1 million hours of service and one that's done 500, you can assume that the one that's been working harder for longer is going to probably fail sooner. And so you could make some strategic moves just off that single piece of information. Now, I know it's not it's hardly scientific, but once you start to compare, once you start to bring in other metrics that can compound that decision making, at that point you start to, I think you can really start to see the business value that collecting just even simple metrics can give you.
Yeah, and uh, and guys, I see a lot of people listening at the moment. So if you want to join, jump in the discussion and give us your opinion, or also share your experience about data, how you use data, how can you reuse data, you are more than welcome. So, going on with our discussion about data, and we touched on this, predictive analytics and also visualization. What's next? I mean, we are talking a lot about AI, for example. I mean, can we use these data sets to do something, to train some AI, and see if we can do something that is not even imaginable today? Or is it, too complex? I mean, I know for experience that in the last few years, uh, big hyperscalers like Amazon and Google and, and, and Microsoft uh, have been working hard to provide developers really easy to use tools. And maybe we don't even need developers anymore for some of these tools. So you can just feed data. I read about AutoML. I read about many of these new tools that could really empower people to do more with their data. Do you think this is the way forward, or is there any other step before thinking about AI for our data? I don't want to complicate things. It's just
Oh,
that
sure,
I want
sure.
to
Well, you picked the
learn.
most complicated trend in the computer and technical industry right now. So no, absolutely like pertinent, obviously. I think for simple applications, so for simple movement of information, for simple, I mean, there's a lot of really cool ways to engage with customers, for example, using AI language processing models and things like this. But in the topics that are on the list today, I think in the Gartner article, uh, the first thing, it's funny, in the past that when I would see these tech trend lists, they would say, AI is the next big thing, AI is the next big thing. And now in the last year or 2 years, it's still on the list, but there's always this big asterisk. So like AI, but ethical AI, or
Mhm,
AI in a way that works,
mhm,
within the bounds of human morality. Or I don't want to get too philosophical, but depending on the applications
yeah.
of what you're using it for, at that point we need to understand, how to properly, integrate it. So there are huge companies, for example, that try to, self-driving cars, for example, having them understand, who is a pedestrian and who isn't, and how they can train the models properly. And so how we can integrate that into something like Cubbit, for example. There are definitely ways to
Mhm,
do it, but I think it would be more mechanized to begin. So something like how we have a coordinator that moves pieces of our stored data from customers around. Having a model that can self-improve would be obviously ideal, because we wouldn't have to have someone who's constantly monitoring and optimizing the network, but we could have a model that's learning from inputs that it's getting from itself, and getting smarter as a result, and therefore giving us better performance on our network completely. But I think the next big thing, the next big conversation for AI in the market is discussing how it can be implemented ethically and in such a way that it operates within the bounds of what we want, and not outside the bounds of what we want. And so that's something that I think I'd be really interested to hear what anyone listening has to say about that, because it's such a hot topic right now, and it's controversial also in some places.
Yes, and guys, again, if you want to jump in, just let us know, raising your hand. We will promote you as a speaker, and you can join this room. And anyway, I mean, the AI topic, maybe we went a little bit off track with AI. I wanted to focus on data today, but you know, these topics are really so connected lately that is really difficult. I mean, I had a couple of direct experiences with my former clients that were really thinking about, okay, we are collecting all these images for quality assurance, and now we are training the AI to understand, you know, if there is something wrong with what we are doing, so that maybe there are minor defects that are not visible to the human eye, or you know, most of the time we are just collecting these images, and we use only a small sample of them, but by using all of them we can see if something is going you know, in the wrong direction. Maybe it's a minimal thing now, but it will grow over time, and so we can address it because it becomes a real problem. So that's something that you know, go ahead, Francesco. Mm. Well, I mean, associating AI with ecology in general or sustainability in general, I mean, is not really something we can do today. So, and not because, you know, it's because the numbers involved today. I mean, think about every time they have to train these mega models that they use today, and think about Nvidia the other day. So that became you know, one of the few 1 trillion companies, and Nvidia sells GPUs. GPUs are really power hungry. They are very powerful pieces of equipment, but you know, to there are a lot of, let's say, issues to implement them. I mean, you need to associate them with a lot of memory, a lot of other computer sources, storage, and everything that goes, you know, very fast with massive bandwidth. All of this is very expensive from the power point of view, and in fact, they have this, you know. This chart that they show that they are consuming, you know, huge amounts of power. So it's not really today, from the training side, something that is sustainable in the long term. I'm pretty sure, on the other hand, that this is the beginning. I mean, it will become. There are two factors. One is the more we use this technology, the more it will be optimized. So over time, it will become easier to optimize these models, and again, we will be able to have you know, less power hungry models. I saw, for example, an article from Facebook not long ago, or Meta now, that they have this open source model that they released that can be trained with less data points, but still being good enough. And so there are new algorithms, there are new optimization, there are new things. So anyway, we need this because power is not only about sustainability; it's also about money. And because, you know, these big corporations doing AI, they really care about money. They also, you know, at the end, care about optimizing. So fortunately, this means better power consumption,
And
sustainability, and
just
so
to
on.
add to that, Enrico, to add to Francesco's question as well, it's not just, I think discussing AI and sustainability isn't really just, it's hard to say AI for example. I think we're at that point we're asking more about how technology and sustainability can live hand in hand. And as
Yeah.
someone personally who's like a academic and professional experiences are at the overlap of environment and technology, the ecology of it goes beyond just utilization. Like we also have to think of the manufacturing processes and everything's like, it gets very complicated when we start to think about how memory is produced and how silicon is used. And it's a huge discussion and very interesting. And maybe we can get into it another time, Enrico.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Also, we are at the top of the hour at this point, but thank you very much for listening, guys. I think this conversation was great. Blaine, you really gave us the opportunity to understand a little bit more about data. Maybe we can have a second live session talking more about what you actually do in the company, because it was really interesting when we had the preparation session, but then we stayed so high level. I mean,
Well,
the
we'll
conversation was
always
great,
go a little
but
off track. I think it's too interesting to stay on a
yeah,
single
yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But we will have other opportunities to talk together about these topics. I think it's really interesting for everybody. And so I think it's time to wrap up this episode. But again, if you didn't have to join for the entire show, remember that it will be available in a few days on Spotify, on our social channels. So just connect with us. You will find it somewhere. Thank you very much, guys. And if you like it, just share it with your colleagues. And if you don't like it, but share it anyway. I don't know, but just give us an ad. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and bye bye.